Hey guys, Teresa Apel with the Clarion Ledger here. I am on Spillway Road in front of the fire station where the firefighters took up an American flag for everyone who died on 9/11. Now these stretch from, well, that sign right there that you can see right at the crosswalk, all the way down to where there's that bridge that crosses the creek. So I came out here earlier this morning just to take a look at what kind of setup they had, and the thought that occurred to me is just kind of, as I've thought about 9/11, which every year it's a thing for me, just like it is for all of you. But what went on for the firefighters that day? We all know they ran into harm's way. We all know they were saving people. Many of them died. But from a firefighter's perspective, what did they see when they actually arrived on scene, when they saw it on TV, when they were standing there as it happened? So I've got Josh Swales, the assistant chief at Reservoir Fire Department, here to talk to me. He's also an Air Force veteran, and just kind of to walk through some of the things that firefighters dealt with that day. Josh, I'm gonna scoot over here so we can see a little better. Tell me a little bit about just when you arrive at a big fire. There's different kinds of fires. I think people don't necessarily realize some of them are worse than others.
Right, there he is. You know, actually a fire for us as firefighters starts as soon as we get the call. No matter the size of the building, what we're going to, if it's a commercial building, an apartment fire, just a house, a standard house fire, single family residential, it starts right there as soon as we get that call. You know, thinking of when we get there, you know, we have assignments that we have to do. We know that the first truck in, and their primary thing is going to be to rescue any lives. Okay, you know, and that goes for like 9/11. Sitting there thinking back that day, I've been here 19 years, and I was actually getting off shift that morning when all this occurred, and I saw it. And of course, none of us knew immediately that it was a terrorist attack, and I just looked and thought, my gosh, you know, we don't have anything of that magnitude, obviously, the high-rise buildings like that, and I can only imagine what their thoughts were as they pulled up on scene to get there. You know, I'm sure they've trained, and I know they do. They train for high-rise fires, you know, and they have those assignments and the things that they knew they had to go in and do, but I can only imagine in their minds when they saw the magnitude of that fire that the guys that have been around for a long time probably knew that this is probably the worst thing they were fixing to face that day. Probably not even knowing that it was a terrorist attack either. I don't believe they did going in. You know, they just knew that a plane had hit the building and they were going into a really large fire and trying to rescue some people. I'm sure a lot of those guys probably knew that they wouldn't come home, you know, that day. I feel that they knew that and they probably saw that on the panic of the people's faces that were trying to come down as they were trying to go in and go up and directing people down and out of there. You know, for us, just on the outside looking in, the first thing I thought of was courage, you know, like the courage it takes to go in and go while other people are running out, and your first responders, all of them, whether it be EMTs, you know, paramedics, the police officers, the firefighters, they all came, they crashed down on the scene that day to help out. And look, there was a lot of volunteers, people that are called to volunteer, that just ran in that day, you know, to help, that weren't necessarily first responders, but their hearts had called them to volunteer and they went in there. Who knows how many of those that rushed in to help as well, but you know, the courage that it took for them to do that. You know, I hate to speculate on what they thought that day, you know, may happen, but I would say that the veterans that have been around a while probably knew that, hey, this could be really, really bad right here.
Right. Now talk to me about, I know that when you arrive at a fire, you kind of size up the situation.
Right.
You kind of look at where the fire is, where you think it's going to go, that kind of thing. When you are looking at that amount of that kind of fire, burning jet fuel, and it has essentially cut off a whole part of the building where you know there are still survivors, what's going through your mind?
Well, you know, the first thing you got to do is obviously rescue is the first priority, but the first thing we got to do is be able to get those that we can get to immediately. Let's get them out of harm's way, and then work our way in. You know, New York Fire Department's got about 10,000 uniformed firefighters on duty, and I don't even think that was enough if you'd had every one of them there that day to accomplish what they needed to get done. But you know, your first priority is getting those people out. After that, we're going to try to get to the harder to reach ones, you know, and I can, you know, they had a tough task at hand because there's only so many ways you can get somebody off of, you know, when they're 100 floors up. You know, there's no ladder truck that's going to reach that high, you know, so there's one way in, one way out. That's from the bottom, you know, and go all the way up to the top and try to bring these people down. And you know, I think for a lot of them, by the time they got up there, is when the actual disaster started to unfold and get worse.
Sure.
So,
Well, and I think another thing that's inherent in most firefighters is we learn that if it's between you and someone who's in there, you risk your life to a certain point,
absolutely.
but you go home.
That's right.
Now, how much does your heart actually kind of take over in that situation?
Yeah, we risk a lot to save a lot. That's the way we look at it, and that's kind of the way we say it. Hey, look, if somebody's in there, I'm gonna risk my life to get them. If there's nobody in there, then I'm not going to take quite as much of a risk, But if there is a human life in there, and I think that every firefighter out there thinks this way, if there's a human life in there and there's any way possible, we're coming in. Come hell or high water, we'll get in there. If we got to tear something up and risk getting burned, risk getting injured, even to a severe degree sometimes, we're going to do it.
Now, let's talk about those rookies that were down there on the ground. There's that
right.
video that we've all seen looking up at that. It was shot by a training officer during
right.
a training. That was their first real experience.
It was. I'd like to know how many of those are still on the job today, because I honestly, I don't know. The ones that are still on the job, they're probably some of your officers now, and the experiences that they have just from their first day on the job like that. It's not every firefighter gets to even experience a house fire their first day on the job, much less the largest terrorist attack on the United States ground, And I can only imagine what they thought, what they saw, but really, in all honesty, I say this, and it's the truth, but the courage that you have to do this job starts the day you sign on the line to do it. The day you say, I want to be a firefighter, and you commit yourself to doing that, or I want to be a police officer or an EMT, that's where the courage starts right there. I think, I'd be willing to bet that majority of them probably stayed. That's what they were there for. They were there to help people, and they know in the back of their minds you may have to make the ultimate sacrifice to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said you've been here 19 years, so you were already a firefighter.
I was.
Where were you that day, and did it change anything about the way that you see your job?
Prior to 9/11, I always said it was a little bit easier to get on the fire departments. It wasn't, I guess sometimes, I hate to say the competition wasn't as stiff, but it seemed to me like it wasn't as many people seeking the firefighter jobs. Now, granted, there's always been a large amount of people that try to get it, but after 9/11, it really increased tenfold. And I think it's because they saw those guys that day that were just so courageous to go in there and give their life to do what they did and try to save others. And for me, sitting here that morning, we shift changed at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was getting off that morning. I hung around and talked to the guys for a little while, and I was on my way out the door when the first tower got hit. I went home. I stayed here for a little bit. We kind of talked about it, like, my gosh, can you imagine what they're thinking, what they're going through? And then I went home, and then one of the shift commanders that was on duty that day, he's actually the fire chief in Forest now, Jason Tillman, he called me and he said, man, cut your TV on at the house. The other tower just got hit. And then we realized that, hey, this is something worse than, this is not just a random act of a plane flying into the tower at that point. And I felt for those guys and for those families, it was what they were going through.
Well, and I know for me, I was working 2 or 3 jobs. I was living in Oxford. I was
right.
in college, I think, and the whole thing was such a wake up for me, because I didn't even know what firefighters did besides put water
right.
on fire.
That's
and
right.
I think that's where we all learned a little bit more about what the job entails. Is there anything you want people to know about that day or about what it takes to be a firefighter that I haven't thought to ask you?
I do think it takes special people. Not everybody out there is probably called to volunteer to help and to sign on that dotted line to step up and say, I may give my life for somebody, But, as a whole, firefighters, police officers, EMTs, we're there to help you. No matter what people's views are today, majority of the people that I know that are in public service in any shape, form, or fashion, they're there to help. They're willing to help. They're willing to lay their life down for you, and we might be a little bit rough around the edges sometimes when you're around us or you see us out in public or something. We may be a little rough around the edges, but on the other side of that, you kind of got to run into a burning building or stand there in front of somebody shooting, and it's an awesome job. It's a satisfying job. It's very satisfying to be able to help somebody out and to see I guess just to see the look on their face and their families that, hey, you know, these guys showed up and helped us.
Well, Josh, thank you guys
You're
for
very
what
welcome.
you do. And,
Absolutely.
and everyone, again, we're out here on Spillway. We're across from Station 1, and every one of these flags stands for somebody who died on 9/11. So if you want to come out here and walk, how long will these be here?
We will take these up tonight after the run's over here.
Okay, so if you want to see this, you have to come this afternoon. And again, like I said, I just felt like it was important to kind of let you guys know what was going on in the minds of the firefighters on 9/11 15 years ago when this happened. Thanks to Josh and thanks to Reservoir Fire Department for doing this with me. So for the Clarion Ledger from Spillway Road, I'm Teresa Apel.